I think it's really cool, though, that you got to leave this peer-driven social model environment.
I call it accountability with love, and I also call loving from a distance. I'm going to be there to help you.
Living by recovery principles is just not really in the cards.
The clinicians and the psychiatrists, especially untrained.
We have an ethics and domain training, and so we really try to help train our peer support, our clinicians, and educate them. All right, so today we got Shannon Gray on the Lane 13 podcast. What's up, Shannon?
What's going on?
How's it going?
Another day.
You've been knee deep in all this peer support stuff,
knee deep,
right?
Actually, for like really for like the 2 years. I mean, prior to that, I was involved in peer support, but when I got told of the upcoming changes a couple years ago, I started diving really in, because that's my one of my top passions is peer support.
Yeah. Tell me why. Give us some of your history. Tell us how you got there.
Other than a PhD in mistakes, right? Yeah.
I think we all have that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's true. No, I'm in long-term recovery. I've been clean and sober since 2001. And I'm a product of multiple treatments and multiple rehabs. And throughout the course of my history, from 89 to 2001, I was in and out of a lot of treatments. And I saw counselors, and I saw psychiatrists, saw some of the best centers, and my family did a lot to try to help me out and do things, and ended up homeless in 99 from my drug and alcohol use, and kind of got back on the proverbial horse, right? And did well, put out almost a year sober, and then fell down again, and never really did anything to really change. And I knew recovery. I talked recovery. I even and one of the things that I did later on in my career was write a curriculum based on 12-step recovery. And I inserted something in the first step, which is treatment smart, recovery smart. And it's the unique ability to rationalize, justify, and minimize, and use recovery concepts as a weapon, right?
Yeah. I've known people that are recovery smart. Yeah. They can quote and cite all the literature, and they just, they're unteachable. They know it all. But living by principles, living by recovery principles is just not really really in the cards.
Yeah, can talk it but can't walk it, and I'd really learned that. And that just there's only one more person that's more dangerous than someone that doesn't know how to get sober, and that's someone that does. Because not only are you talking it, but then you're affecting others while you do it, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I got through all that, and in and out of and for me, the clinicians and the psychiatrists, especially untrained, I ended up walking out of those sessions, almost feeling like a victim, justifying my actions, having full of self-pity, felt like I could manipulate them. And whether I could or not, that's a moot point. That's how I felt. No one ever really confronted it. They gave suggestions, but it wasn't.
Were
really
they giving you multiple diagnoses too at this time? Multiple.
An addict or an alcoholic at any point in time that's not in recovery and or in active use can qualify for so many different disorders. So I'm sure I'm exhibiting the symptoms of those things. So I'm not disputing that. But the root cause of self was my alcohol and drug problem.
Right, because I think I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and I had all these clinical diagnoses, which, probably made sense at the time.
Yes.
So there was a lot of diagnosis along the way, too.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm this and I'm that, and I knew that I always had a problem with alcohol, but doing something about it, like you said, a minute or two ago, is two different things. Mm-hmm. And so in 2001, I ended up in the healing place, and it was a peer-driven model. So it was a 6 to 9 month program, which I lost my mind when I started. Long term. I was like, I can't do that. And of course, I was like, no. And they were like, hell no, I'm not doing that. But they also informed me that where else are you going to go? and I didn't really have a place to go because I'd exhausted all my options. My parents and my family, who we do family groups to this day, and I'm grateful for, they found Al-Anon. And so they were loving me from a distance. They were not that people talk about that tough love thing. Well, I call it accountability with love, and I also call loving from a distance. I'm going to be there to help you, but I'm not going to be there to enable you, right?
Right.
And so this peer-driven model that I went to, the peer mentors at this particular social model program, I just connected with day one. And it was the first time that a place had intervened and told me what I didn't want to hear in order to help me. And it was a constant thing.
And they implemented and implanted other people that had been where you had been.
Yes.
And they're throughout this whole building in all different stages of their own recovery process. Many that have, been before you that were further along.
Right.
And so they were able to take their experience and what they had learned and reach back and sort of pull you through.
Yes.
Right. And it wasn't a clinician or a therapist or someone that was more of a clinical, a clinical person, but it was someone that had already done that. And they're like, listen, I just did it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, and there's progress and there's always a place, for the clinical aspect of it. But for recovery and true recovery, nothing hit for me like a peer support, and then that's what I call it now. And that was kind of the based on that accountability with love, but that empathetic aspect of it. So I'm going to hold you accountable, but I'm going to share with you why I'm holding you accountable. Which is because I did these same things and I don't want that to happen to you.
Right. And it really reduces shame, right?
Yes.
Because we talk about a reduction in shame. And sometimes when you are with a clinical person or a person that feels like their whole life is just all the way together and they have it all and you don't really understand my problems, right? Because you're a therapist. Obviously, you have a great life. Like you've been to school and you look great and, and I'm over here falling apart. And so it's really hard to connect. And there's a level of shame that a person still feels in that setting. And so having that peer there really reduces shame. And we do know that reduction of shame is a huge catalyst for recovery because the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yes.
And it's really hard to have connection when someone feels shame.
Absolutely. My self-worth, or anybody that I've ever worked with, because I've worked in this field, since then, is basically the self-worth is 6 feet below the ground. It's not there. There's no element of confidence. There's no element of anything. There might be a mask. There are plenty of masks, but that's there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your professional career because you've been basically since you've been in recovery, you've also worked in the field, right? And taken on many different roles and positions and peer support and peer mentoring has really been a constant throughout your entire career, right?
It really has. So in 2002, when I completed, I did become a peer mentor for a period of time. And, I always recommended because working in the field of addiction is not easy, right? And it's not for everyone.
High burnout rates.
Yes, high burnout rates. And I'll get into that later with the peer support, the burnout rates before that versus the clinician. But, going into that office and seeing if that's something that you want to do, right? And then I was allowed to do that and just on a very low level, just kind of get down and work with everybody. I lived there on property and, you maintain, but I was learning things as you go and learning how to share that experience, strength, and hope. And then, I moved out, went back to school, and at that time they didn't have peer support, so I learned a curriculum and I taught groups on a low level, education based groups, not process groups, because I wasn't credentialed to do so. And then I did that for several years while I went to college to get my certified alcohol and drug counselor. I ended up becoming a clinical director in as early as 2007 of a 30-day center. Over the course of the next few years, I ended up working and directing a detox for a period of time, doing outpatient a period of time. And then in 2010, I was fortunate enough to go back to the place, although not in a different location, and direct a 100-bed center, the Healing Place in Campbellsville. After that, I left the Healing Place in 2021, when I left, I was kind of managing and overseeing all 3 campuses for a few years. And that was anywhere from about 350 to 400 clients. And then I left there and went to another agency and wrote and developed a peer support curriculum, a 6-month model, along with a therapeutic community in the treatment modality, not the social model, which is a little different.
And so, you and I have had a very similar path. We worked together for a long time, and you were my supervisor at one point when I was managing the women's program, and you and I both ended up leaving right around not long after each other, around the same time. And I think it's really cool how you were able to leave that environment, and you had like some clinical experience years and years before, but I think previous to the most recent like 5 to 7 years, there really weren't a lot of treatment programs, right? And so most of your treatment providers were nonprofits that had been around for a really long time. And so, we used to say like the healing place was the last house on the block. And so there weren't a lot of options for people. And we were able to run this program that was a non-clinical model. And so it was really cool at the time. And then all these addiction treatment centers started popping up, right? And there's just so many now. And, I think it's really cool though, that you got to leave this peer-driven social model environment and immerse yourself into a huge clinical model. Right. And I think that probably gave you some really, really good experience in learning how to implement peer mentors into a clinical model because you had only known it this way for so long. Right. And so what did you learn in that process? And how do you think that peer mentors fit in these clinical models?
And that's such the challenge because because I am a clinician, I'm a certified clinical clinician, but I'm also an overgrown peer support and will be till the day I die. Not changing that but there's a thing called self-disclosure, and when you're learning and you're working in the field as a clinician, you're understandably, due to boundaries and ethics and things like that, you're supposed to not disclose very little, little about yourself, right? You don't share your everyday experience, nor should anyone, but your past experience that was always for me frowned upon and early in school, and I can remember that learning certain things with self-disclosure. Well, as a peer support and a peer mentor, your number one asset is self-disclosure, right? It's sharing your experience, strength, and hope. So if you're going to take that and be within a clinical model, there has to be a way to do it. The first and foremost thing, and I'm going to go back to this in every ethics training I always do is, and this to me is whether you're in recovery or not, and you're a clinician or a peer support or anything, what does your recovery program look like? Now, that doesn't, if you're not in recovery, do you have good self-care? Do you take care of yourself? Do you have awareness? Well, in peer support, it all starts with every issue, every ethical issue, everything like that comes back to the individual's recovery program. Because are you open-minded? Are you teachable? Are you all these things? Because if you're going to step into the world of a clinical environment, you're going to know how to self-disclose properly. You're going to have to understand the limits of your scope of practice. Not being a peer support doesn't make you a clinician. And then so you can't give diagnoses and you can't document things in a certain way based on treatment opinions. Your experience is your education is your experience, strength, and hope, and what you've learned in recovery, and that's how you can share. So that should be documented appropriately. So that first and foremost is the biggest thing, understanding your, scope of practice, training peer support to understand that if it's a clinical situation, I document things and reach out to your clinician,
right?
And allow them to work together because in my experience, in the clinical models that I saw, LOAs or AMAs, leaving against medical advice has always been an issue. It's never not going to be an issue.
Right. People are going to leave treatment.
People are going to leave treatment.
Yeah, they're going to go.
if you talk to, and I've talked, and I don't give you statistics, I don't operate under that. I operate under what people tell me and the experiences. 19 times out of every 20, if I talk to someone that wanted to leave or said that they wanted to leave, they tell me a peer support is the one that talked them out of staying.
Right.
Or talk them into staying, sorry.
But kind of going back to your previous point, peer support, upon its inception and when it was sort of created, it was never meant to be a clinical service, right?
I don't believe so. No.
Peer support, I got my peer support, my registered peer support back in 2016. I think I was the second person in the state to get that credential. And it was hard, and I had to have the clinical supervisor, and I had to do all these things. And then since then, there have been a lot of different certifications that have been created. But peer support is not a clinical modality, right? It is meant to be in conjunction with a clinical model, right? And so we place peer support in clinical models, but it's really hard without proper training and things like that, it's really hard for the peer support to understand their place and sort of what they're bringing to the table as peer support immersed in this clinical model. And from our experience, we know that people get a little bit of recovery under their belt, and instead of going and making coffee in a church basement or, doing some of the things that probably build you up and prepare you to do other things, they're trying to save the world.
Well, and that brings me, you bring up an excellent point, and that, I'll take it to this. So I'm in my view, early recovery is 5 years. Now, I'm not talking about making the initial change. That can happen within a few months, overnight, whatever. We're talking, when I say early recovery, I'm talking about debt. I'm talking about, and it may even be longer than that, right? Relationships. How do you transition back into society? Because the emotional maturity level, I started drinking and using at the age of 16. So when I got sober at 28, I'm a 16-year-old. Okay, and that's something very consistent. So if you take a 16-year-old, by the end of my 5th year, I was probably a 25-year-old. I mean, to be honest. And so it's a long process. It's a beautiful process, but there's peaks and valleys and bumps. Okay, so back to the burnout rate and then the peer support itself. When a peer support becomes a peer support at a year sober, they are still transitioning back into society, and they have not worked on themselves. They've worked on themselves, but they haven't worked on themselves thoroughly. And they're still trying to get debt out and, reintegrate back into society and go on these things.
Right. They're in the reintegration period.
Correct.
Which is crucial.
Absolutely. And then now they're in a position of sharing experience, strength, and hope, and getting paid for advice or experience, as we shall say. And so that creates a lot of burnout, a lot of problems, a lot of all these things if they're not properly trained, if they have not worked on themselves, because then they can easily go from one fence to the other, which basically means their work becomes their recovery.
Yeah. And, also another good point on that too is that you have people that, have been taking a shot at recovery for the past year, and they're immersed in the lives of these people that are in super early recovery, right? So 30, 60, 90 days. And they're immersed in their life, and, boundaries get crossed. And that's usually one of the first things that happen is that peer support will cross some boundaries, especially without proper supervision and accountability.
Correct.
They can cross some boundaries, and that's where a lot of things can get messy and happen. It happens with clinicians too, but it's more likely to happen with peer support. And so I know you're really big on ethics, and we have a peer support training that we do. We have an ethics and domain training, and so we really try to help train our peer support, our clinicians, and educate them. But you're really big on ethics. And so why is ethics training important for peer support?
At the risk of self-disclosure, again, who else better to work with someone that struggled themselves? And I had my ethical and boundary issues early on as well, and I paid a price as well as I deserved that price.
Yeah.
So that's again a real big passion, and yes, it does happen. Whether clinicians, nursing, anything in the helping field is a very common thing when it comes to dual relationships and ethics. With peer support and self-disclosure and the lack of, the early recovery aspect, one can get into the world of trying to save someone. They can get into the world of getting, their ego out of hand and things like that. And basically that person can easily become their drug of choice. It's like filling that void and switching it. So instead of my recovery, I'm working around the validation of my clients, because again, there is a power difference and a power struggle. And so I am the professional. I am the credentialed professional, and there is a power dynamic, and the clients are going to look at me differently. And if I am looking at, if my recovery are the clients and they're constantly giving me compliments or telling me how great I am, and I am walking under the influence, that is opening up the door for all of those things. So in our training, yes, it meets the criteria when it comes to, the codes and the standards of ethics, and those are discussed. But a big part of the training is, to me, which is the most important thing, is discussing the root cause of self that lead to the ethics in the first place.
Right.
Almost like relapse. Relapse doesn't start, or return to use, I call it. I call it return to use more than I do relapse. But return to use generally starts months or weeks before the event actually happens. The same with ethics and domains. And that's why we put so much power into this training on what part of me is affected, and why am I doing this? Why am I not? Why am I not talking to the people that I not talk to? So that, to me, is how we create big change when it comes to it, is to address that aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there was a bill that was passed in 2024, the 2024 legislative session, that has really, it's proving to cause some issues for peer support right now. And we're, in a place where come January 1st, there's going to be some significant changes that might cause some harm, right, to peer support and providers alike. I think Lane 13 has done a really good job in working over the past year and a half with different stakeholders and educating people in the community, and really trying to do our part in preparing providers and peer support for these changes that are coming.
Yes.
Whether we agree with the changes or not really is irrelevant, right? It's at the end of the day, they're happening.
Yes.
And so, what is your advice right now? We do know that come January 1, the certification that peer support have right now is not really going to be reimbursable through the eyes of Medicaid. And at the end of the day, providers have to be able to function and operate and get paid to be able to pay these peer support. And so there's this great fear that, there's going to be a reduction in workforce and peer support are going to lose their jobs. And so what can you say to the peer support and the providers out there right now that really need to think about how they're going to mitigate some of this harm done to the industry?
But it's a fantastic question and a loaded one.
Okay. Well, I didn't mean for it to be loaded.
No. I mean, my answer, because I mean loaded in the sense that I would love to say a bunch of different things, because when I process change, and I look within self, and that's what I've always been taught to. When we process change, we come from a place called trust the process.
Yeah.
And to me, the power in that statement is to do everything in front of me to be done, and the results are left up to God. That's how I view trusting the process.
Yeah.
Did I do everything I could do? So this bill came around, and we have been talking about this for a significant period of time. We have had public forums. We have had, anybody that's available. We have discussed it, right? We've had trainings and discussing it and things like that. Okay. Well, there are places that have responded, and there are places that haven't responded. So there's a part on every end. People talk about the Board of Alcohol and Drugs process. I'm a fan of the process. It's IRC and RC accredited. It's been that way, but it is a long process, and that's one of the greatest challenges that's coming. Right. So there are a bunch of people that have not gotten credentialed yet, or even temporary, and are going to go past this due date and still either be a temporary or not even under the board yet to fail to meet these guidelines. So if I'm looking at change in how I process, the first thing I do is take my part. I say, okay, I waited until the last minute. So that's my part. Now, going forward, my advice is this: do everything you can do in front of you. There are things in place that we are told where that this issue may be addressed and removed. There may be a bill that removes it. There may be a place where it's postponed. We don't know. That's not my lane. That's not my area of expertise. So we can only control what we can, what's put in front of us, which is still this. So get your applications in, find your clinical supervisor, and start this process, and then trust the process as far as that going forward. Now, I would have each organization have their supervisors write letters, because one of the things that I'm told in the bill as far as becoming a temporary alcohol and drug peer support is the perception that temporaries are not trained. And although initially to become a temporary at this current time, there is no training. When you come under the supervisor and under the board, you are significantly trained because you are under someone like mine's credential. Right. So I'm recommending that all supervisors write letters and validate the amount of trainings that each peer support have to put in their file, to not only have their CEU trainings, the trainings like we do with ethics and domains, their 30-hour peer support certification training, whatever ethics and training they have, along with the supervisor training, and have that in their file in case that there is ever is an audit. Then they would at least be able to demonstrate that, hey, our peer support are very well trained. I'm not saying that that's the best solution, but to me, that's at least everything that we can do up to this point.
Good, nice, yeah. And this is sort of what we've been telling people over the past year and a half is, hey, you guys need to get this extra 16 hours. If you already have a certified peer support through the Department of Behavioral Health, come get this 16-hour ethics and domain training, get you a supervisor and fill out your application and go ahead and get the process started. And so we've been telling people this for the past year and a half. We even created a training, right, to assist peer support in getting what they need, right? There wasn't a lot of people that did that very specific training that they needed, that 16-hour. So we, especially you facilitate the training. You stepped in and we created the training, got it approved, and we've been training peer support all year.
Yes.
And so that is another way that, we've really tried to help mitigate some of the harm in this situation, right? And, we do have more trainings coming up. People can always reach out, lane13consulting.com, and go on there and inquire about our upcoming peer support training to get those extra hours. And we are working on a policy. We've been working on a bill for the past year with probably the people that should have been at the table to begin with when discussing peer support at all. So we've been working on a bill on behalf of our clients, and that bill will hopefully, make peer support where they are billable so that they don't lose their jobs and providers can get reimbursed for their services. But also, we believe that peer support has earned their rightful place in having their own credentialing board.
Yes.
When talking to the Department of Behavioral Health, we learned that there's more than 20,000 peer support credentials that have been handed out, that people have. Now, whether more than 20,000 peer support are actually operating, we don't really know. But when you look at that large number, I mean, you have to think when you look at a nursing board, a physician's board, the social work board, all these other boards, they really have their own rightful board and their home, and it gives them that professionalism. It has a whole board dedicated to that one profession, and it also can house peer support that operate under different domains, right? And so we have our mental health peer support that's starting to be utilized. But you have your substance use treatment peer support. And we would also really like to see reentry peer support utilized a lot more. I believe that reentry peer support is very vital when you're thinking about someone walking out of prison or jail, people that have been there for a long period of time, because they have a road of recovery ahead of them, a period of reintegration. Also, there's gambling, which is very prominent now, and a lot of people have switched their substance, their drug of choice over to gambling. And so, you know, I know that there's going to be some gambling peer support that are also going to be there. But, you know, we do believe that this is the time to sort of reimagine what peer support should look like. And it should have its own credentialing board that is a standalone board that can help take it to the next level and where peer support should go.
I want to add, and I 1,000% agree. And here's a couple of things. And you know, with all the things of this bill that's passed, one of the big positives, you know, when I'm going to speak specifically to SUD, you know, substance abuse, but with this is the accountability factor, you know. So I'm such a big advocate of, you know, peer support, but right now, you know, we can take parts and everywhere. There are places that are certifying peer support at 4 months sober.
That's right.
5 months sober, 6 months sober. There are places, what happens when a peer support relapses? In the current system, if a peer support relapses, they could go work somewhere else
or sleep with the client, have severe ethical violations.
All the above without. So as a supervisor, under what has happened over the last few months is there's actually been a few that's been held accountable by me, you know, even by that. So I want to say that there's some definite pros and we're heading in that direction. Now, what this board will do is put a higher level of consistency to that. So again, it's not going to stop people from violating ethics, but it will reduce the numbers when the accountability rates. Because currently, if I violate an ethical guideline, you know, I may get terminated from that particular job, but I can go down the road and work somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about really, as you said, enhancing the credibility of peer support, this to me is a massive start in the right direction because we know how effective it is. We know how important it is. The peer support also need to take their part and say, yes, I am a professional credential.
That's right.
Because if, you know, one of the things that peer support feel working with clinicians is, well, I'm just a peer support. You know, you've got a master's degree, you've got this. And so it gets, that lived experience gets minimized. And let's just say this, if you've come through that hell on the other end and you've walked through that, that's a beautiful and rare thing. It's not the most common thing to be in recovery. It's more common for people to not be in recovery than it is to. So really having the confidence and that it is a professional credential, that I am a peer support.
Yeah.
So these ideas are going to further, I believe, enhance that.
Absolutely. And, you know, we can even back up and talk about how we got here to begin with. I mean, the peer support credentialing process, I think it just sort of got out of hand, right? It wasn't at anybody's fault, but there was just a lot of people. There were some providers themselves, some great providers and some providers that probably weren't that great.
Yeah.
But, you know, peer support were going in and they were doing a training. The providers themselves were facilitating the training. They were passing the answers around, right?
Yes.
And then it was like, here you go. Now you have your peer support. You're probably 30 days into recovery. And you are now a billable asset for my company.
Yes, and I want to add to just to your statement, you're stating what peer support have reported to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're
well,
not,
this is known.
You're not.
We know this is happening.
We're not there. We've literally been told this on several occasions.
Oh, I mean, there's been, I can't even tell you how many, but we know for a fact this was happening, right?
Yes.
And so these organizations now have this army of billable people that they're sending in to recovery homes and all these different places, and they're going in and working with these clients, and then they're billing Medicaid for them.
Yes.
So when we were in Frankfurt and we were listening to the interim committee hearings and Medicaid was going in and reporting, they were reporting that 85% of billable services were non-clinical. Right. Peer support and another billing code that was heavily overutilized. And, but, that really told us that peer support are the ones doing all the work in these facilities without the proper training. They were getting burnt out. They were hopping from facility to facility, right? And they weren't being taken care of. And our most precious and vulnerable people that work in this industry were the ones that were being abused.
Yep.
And that's how we got where we are today with all of this, right? Because, at the end of the day, things couldn't continue the way they were. Right? But also, we are in a place now where the pendulum swung all the way the other way, and now we're out of balance with there being no peer support. Right? And so what Lane 13, what you and I and the other folks and our clients have been doing is really trying to find that balance in, hey, peer support are vital. We need them. We shouldn't be abusing them.
Right.
And so now we have arrived at this point, right, where we really hope that this bill is going to help solidify the peer support industry, make them billable assets, but also have a professionalism and an accountability mechanism to where poor providers aren't using them and just kind of bringing them in and chewing them up and spitting them out, and that's kind of what has happened. And that's how we got here.
Yep.
And, we think that working with other people that we've come up with a pretty good solution, right? It's going to take some time. It's all about how the board's implemented. There's a lot of nuances that go into it, but we do have to start moving in that direction. Yeah,
and I want to say, credit to you, Lane 13. You're the one spearhead. You're getting ahead of this, and we've been ahead of this whole time. There's that saying, right? 3 sides to every story, one side and the other side, and the truth somewhere in the middle. It can lean, of course. Well, in this case, I call it, the character defect and to use a recovery, character defect and shortcoming. I was one of the world's biggest people pleasers, worried about what you think and anything. Well, when I made that change and found the freedom of saying the word no, I kind of turned and went to the opposite, spectrum and became, used no through everything, right? And then I had to come back. And that's what we're trying to do. It went one way. Okay, now it's the other way, and we want to bring this to at least to the middle, to a level of balance.
Yeah. And, we did file a bill last session that made it unanimously through both the House and the Senate. It made it to the Senate floor the last day of session. It ultimately did not pass, but it would have mitigated a lot of this harm and some of these things that are coming up on January 1st. But I really appreciate the conversation and us really being able to sit down and kind of let everybody know, this is where we're at. This is how we got here. This is why we do what we do and what we plan on doing to move forward.
And if I can say one thing to the peer support, listening and with these changes and the jobs and whatever, if you're a peer support in SUD, that means is that you are also in most all cases in recovery, which means is you've probably either been shot at, been overdosed, been locked up, been in conflict with family and friends, been through a greater hell than, I call it, incomprehensible demoralization. You'll get through this. Work a program, take your part of any kind of personal recovery program that you have, take your part and do everything in front of you to be done and trust the process, because I want to end with the burnout rates. I wanted to go back to that towards the end. So, and I was told, and I don't have specifics, from a clinical perspective, the burnout rate in SUD is around 2 years. That doesn't mean people relapse, or I'm just talking about people in recovery that become a clinic. The burnout rate is around 2 years. There's no real statistic other than what I see, and I see it in peer support at around 6 months. Yeah. 6 months, they're already starting to get burnt out, and that's what we need to prevent.
Well, and that's when we worked together at the peer-driven social model program. That was the cap for peer mentors was 6 months. After 6 months, you really need to figure out what you're going to do and start living life on life's terms. It's that makes perfect sense. But I think that if anybody has any questions, they can call Shannon. You can reach out to lane13consulting.com. Send us a message, give us a call. We're here. How many calls a day do you probably take?
I've been getting several lately.
Yeah.
But we still will. This is my passion, and this is what I'm doing, and this is what you're going to be doing, getting ahead of the bill, and but we're going to be working hand in hand, and there's still a long road and process, but this process saved my life, and I've seen it so effective in so many people's lives that no one's saying it's the only way.
Right. It's not the only way.
It's not, and there are all types of modalities out there, but I will argue that it is the most successful way.
Yeah. Well, we'll probably die on that hill.
Yes.
And I'm right there with you. And it's because of my life experience and what I've witnessed, right?
Right.
I mean, when I was managing a 250-bed facility, the miraculous miracles that I saw on a daily basis, and the amount of women that walked out of there with their lives completely changed that are still living like that today, it's insurmountable, right? And so it's really hard for me to discount that experience that I've had. And and again, there's so many different paths to recovery. And I think that there's someone else that has a completely different experience than I do.
Sure.
And they would probably die on their hill as well. And that's fine. But we here at Lane 13, you, me, Selena, Lindsay, Heather, all of us, we are passionate about peer support. We want it to survive. We want it to thrive. We want peer support to get what they need to be held accountable. When you care about someone, you're willing to hold them accountable. Absolutely. Accountability is an act of love.
That's right.
And we want that for our peer support. We want them to have their own home, their own professionalism, and we want them to be able to move forward in a way that they've not been able to do so up till this point.
Right.
And I think that's the goal. So, but if anybody has any questions, they can definitely reach out. I know Shannon's always willing to take a phone call. And any last words?
No, just keep doing what you're doing. We got to end with that.
Keep coming back. It works if
keep
it works.
doing what you're doing. So I didn't go that route, but I went we're very blessed to do what we do.